Hello everybody. Today I'm making a magazine pouch for a Springfield XDM 10mm. It will be a clip-on style, and I'll be making it out of 3 to 4 ounce leather. It'll be lined, so there will be 2 layers of that. I begin with laying the magazine on the center line of my paper, and then I rotate it on its side and trace around the outline. And now I'm wrapping a strip of leather around it that's roughly the same thickness as the 2 layers of 3 to 4. And then I mark the point where the leather contacts itself. In hindsight, I didn't quite mark where the leather touched itself, so the stitch line ended up being just a tad tight, but it still worked out okay. And now I'm transferring those marks onto the paper, and those will become our stitch line. I measured the same distance and then continued it along the bottom edge of the magazine. Now I'm offsetting from the stitch line roughly 3/16 of an inch. This is how much distance I usually leave between the edge of the holster and the stitch line. To attach the holster to the belt, I'm using a steel spring clip from jrmclips.com. I don't remember which clip I'm using. It's either the 3009 or the 3023. I'm offsetting my stitch line roughly 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the clip. I'm doing that on the sides and the bottom of the clip. And now I'm marking another 3/16 of an inch away from the stitch line, and that will be the edge of the reinforcement piece that holds the clip. And here I was originally planning on cutting a slot in the top of the reinforcement piece where the clip would slide down into the slot and the top edge of the reinforcement would get stitched onto the holster. And I decided to ultimately cut the reinforcement piece shorter so that the top edge of the reinforcement is underneath the inside of the clip. And now I'm drawing a mini sweat shield. I like to call it a pinch guard. It helps to keep the magazine from catching on clothing and whatnot as it goes into the mag pouch. The bottom of this magazine tapers inward a little bit, so I wasn't exactly sure where to place the spring clip because obviously it can't bend to match the shape of the magazine, but ultimately I decided to lower it just a little bit. I'm cutting out around the edge of the pattern, and then I'll fold it along the center line on the paper and transfer the pattern outline to the other half of the paper. At this point, I'll start breaking the pattern down into the individual pieces. You'll need to pay attention to left or right hand and which direction you want the bullet tip to be facing when it's worn on the belt. This holster is for a right-handed shooter, so it's going to be worn on the left side of the body, and the bullet tips will be facing forward. This is the point in time where I decided I wanted to trim the reinforcement piece where the spring clip goes. I wanted to make it a little bit shorter. Instead of having the slot on the top, it was just going to fit underneath the fold on the clip. So I trimmed a little off the top of the reinforcement, or the pocket piece. I'm tracing the outline of the pocket piece onto the outside of the pouch pattern. This is so I'll know where to apply glue and stitches. And I'm trying to figure out the ride height and where to place the clip on the outside of the mag pouch. I felt like the top edge of the mag pouch was a little too high, which would make it difficult to grab the magazine when it's fully seated inside the pouch. Here I'm marking roughly where the glue will go. In hindsight, it's probably better to simply superglue a couple of points around the pocket piece because the contact cement doesn't have a whole lot of holding power with such a small gluing surface. And you're gluing to the grain side of the leather, which makes it even worse. The stitches will do the majority of the work. And when you form the holster, or the mag pouch anyways, the edge of the contact cement became visible. So probably best just to either not glue it on at all and just hold it in place as you start to sew it on, or super glue it. Since this will be lined, you need to cut a front and a back piece for the body panel. So flip the pattern over and trace it in both directions. I'm applying contact cement to the flesh side of both body panels. Now that the pieces are glued together, we can trace around the outline of the pattern and trim it to size. I'm airbrushing this dark brown, and then I'll be doing a black accent around the edges. I'm applying 4 coats of the dark brown color. If you're wondering why I don't wear latex gloves, it's because I ran out about 8 years ago and I never replaced them. I felt like I made a bigger mess. It was a lot easier to get dye unintentionally in places that I didn't want it because it didn't seem like the dye dried on the surface of the latex gloves. I think it's just easier to not make a mess if I'm not wearing them. I'm sanding the edges flush on my drill press. Right now I'm only focusing on the opening on the top edge of the magazine pouch. And now I'm trying to bevel the edge on the reinforcement piece, but the leather is too thin and the bottom edge of the edger is hitting the work surface below it. So I had to prop it up on the edge of my leather to get a little bit more height. This way the edger wouldn't drag on the granite surface below. I'm burnishing the edges of the reinforcement piece with gum tragacanth from Tandy Leather. Now I'm marking and punching a hole for the rivet that will be used to secure the spring clip inside the pocket. And this is the stitch line so that I know roughly where to put glue. And as I mentioned earlier, I probably would just use super glue at this point on just a few key points on the corners probably, instead of doing this, because the contact cement ended up being visible once the holster was formed. Now I'm marking the stitch line around the outside of the pocket piece with a craft tool adjustable creaser from Tandy Leather. And I'm sewing on the Cobra Class 4. I'm using 277 bonded nylon thread in the top and the bottom. And since this mag pouch is being lined, and this applies to holsters as well, you could sew the reinforcement or the pocket piece on prior to gluing the body panels together. This way the stitching would be hidden on the inside of the layers. It wouldn't be visible inside the holster or the mag pouch. And now I'm just pulling the threads through to the inside, and then I'll cut and melt them and flatten them so they mushroom out and making them harder to pull through. Contact cement doesn't stick very well to the grain surface of the leather, so we have to scuff it up to give it something to adhere to. So I'm scuffing around the outer edges of the inside of the magazine pouch. I'm just using a scratch awl that I cut shorter and sharpened into a point. Yes, I know, I forgot to stitch the 2 layers of leather together on the top of the mag pouch. I'll be peeling it apart and fixing it here shortly. Right now, I'm applying water to the inside and the outside along the fold line to help it fold a little more easily. Here's the point where I finally realized that I forgot to stitch it, so I'm going to stitch it now, off camera. And now I'm just putting down a fresh coat of contact cement around the edge, just to make sure that it sticks together well. The edges lined up fine. I just needed to give it a light sanding to get rid of some of the contact cement that got on the edge of the mag pouch. And now I'm going to sew the bottom and side of the mag pouch closed. And now I'm applying gum trag to the edge again, and then I'll burnish it. And then I added a 50-50 mixture of beeswax and paraffin to put a nice polish on the edge. And then I buff it with a piece of denim. You can use canvas too. This helps build up heat and helps the wax to soak into the edge better and remove any excess. When you form your magazine pouch, you want to make sure your magazine is loaded, because the tip of the magazine shape is different than if there's no rounds in the magazine. And I just sprayed the mag pouch inside and out with a little bit of soapy water. And this is the point where I realized the stitch line was just a hair too tight. It could be that the double layers of 3 to 4 ounce leather were a little bit thicker than the single strip of leather that I used to get the stitch line dimension. So I'm just inserting the magazine into a Ziploc bag, which helps it slide into the mag pouch better, and it's stretching the leather out just a little bit. I'll be sealing the magazine pouch with a 50-50 mixture of Fiebing's acrylic resin and water. I always start with the inside and apply it liberally so it soaks in really well. When you apply it to the outside, you want to make sure the entire surface is evenly wet looking. You don't want any spots that look slightly drier than the other. It just needs to all look consistent in color. As you apply the sealer, just slowly use less and less pressure to avoid getting air bubbles. Once the sealer starts to dry just a little bit, I come back and burnish the edges with a wooden dowel. And then you can buff them with a horsehair brush. Eric Larson with HBE Leatherworks has a great video called Submersion Dyeing and Clear Coating, Buffing, and Final Edge Burnishing. And I'd highly suggest you go watch his video. He has some great tips in there. Before the pouch is completely dry, I'll go ahead and insert the spring steel clip back into the pouch. I'm using Speedy double cap rivets, and I slide the cap in with the clip at the same time. And that pretty much wraps up this mag pouch build. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button. If you'd like to see more, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. And there's always room for improvement. So if you have a better way of doing things, I'd love to hear your comments down below. If you'd like to support future videos, check us out on Patreon, or swing by our website for patterns, acrylic templates, holsters, etc. Take care, and thanks for watching.